Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio, audio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Australian government has very slightly, and hardly noticeable at all, I think, but very slightly made the raised the bar for students and certain classes of immigrants to come in through scam labour hire groups and so on. Now, I don't think the government's gone anywhere near far enough. Their purported intention, which I don't believe, by the way, is to reduce immigration from the currently absurd levels of 550,000 a year coming into Australia. Population of what, 26, 27 million, and 500,000 a year being brought in. Yeah, right. To reduce that to somewhere around 250,000, which is again far and above what's needed. Keep in mind that of all the migrants that come in, of those 550,000 or 48,000, whatever, 548,000 migrants that come in, somewhere in the region of 20,000, give or take, are going to be useful in any way to the economy. And most of those will be taking jobs that local people could have filled. So the net gain to the economy is almost zero. Indian businesses, the Brahmin businesses that open up in the West are typically not real businesses. They're just bragging rights for guess what? I've opened up a business in a white country, and they don't employ local people. They're here in the West to take, not to share or to give. And as I've mentioned many times before, Indians that are 5-6 generations Western born still say they're Indian, still stay in Indian enclaves, still only marry other Indians, still only insist that their children marry other Indians, determined to remain genetically pure, and so on and so forth. That they make lousy immigrants, in my view. The majority of Indians that are coming in are getting jobs only because the government is increasing the size of the public service and gifting through affirmative action and race gender quotas, giving jobs to Indians. Hardly any Indians could ever win jobs on merit if they without affirmative action and race gender quotas and so on. Anyway, so the government's cracking down. I don't. Again, I see it as not cracking down at all. But the government's looking at, the Australian government is looking at these labour hire scams that are going on using Indians, where Indians are coming to Australia to do some 6-week course on dishwashing or floor sweeping, but using that to get a student visa, which then allows them to work in Australia, and then after they've been in Australia a couple of years, they apply for citizenship, then bring over their whole fucking village and everything once they get through family reunion and that sort of stuff. So it's a huge and terrible scam. Now, on top of that, India is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So bribing public officials in India, for whether it's for getting bullshit degrees, or whether it's getting in order to meet thresholds for migration and so on. This is so widespread that there's no way that certainly most of the Indians that I meet would ever have got in if there'd been any sort of scrutiny. Now, and I've mentioned this before, when the Indians first started to arrive in numbers, there was the company where I worked at the time was a VP. I got leaned on quite heavily to one of the directors. I had to front the directors once a month and say give a State of the Nation address type thing. And one of them, this guy was an idiot. I mean, he'd inherited vast sums of money, but he's a fucking moron. He was on the board, and he'd read in some newspaper somewhere that all these highly educated Indians were running around, and you could employ them for half what you'd have to pay a local Australian. So he was like, hey, Billy Bob, why don't we get onto this? This looks like a good lurk to get into. We can halve our labour costs, and these guys are all triple PhDs and so on. And on the face, I can look at that and go, that's bullshit. I mean, really. No, I through that I travelled in business a lot, I knew that India was a corrupt basket case, and you've got the Brahmin class, which is the upper class, that just make up all the rules to suit themselves. And so I knew this was bullshit. Or suspected. I think knew is maybe too strong a term. And I was hiring these guys who were supposedly computer programming geniuses, and they couldn't even cut a line of code. They just bought their university degree. The guy that I didn't know one end of a computer from another. So I ended up firing pretty much every one of the ones I'd hired. Couple of Sikhs kind of worked out, maybe not too bad, but that was it. And as for the Indian women, every one of them was fucking useless. So, but anyway, the Indian, the subcontinent, but particularly the Indian thing is that, and as I've met, a number of Indians with, from the time I was a little girl, I always wanted to come to Australia. I always wanted to come to the West, and I always wanted to. And so they see it as some sort of a strange entitlement and birthright. I'm not quite sure I get it, because it seemed to be an absolute conflict, because the Indian nationalist press will scream and rave about fascist, Nazi, racist white people, far right, white supremacy, Nazi, and they just don't fucking stop going on. Everything is racist, and the Indians are so chip on shoulder touchy about that. And so they want to come to, I really want to go to Australia, this white country, and I really want to go to be amongst all those fascist Nazi Hitlers. I want so much to be rubbing shoulders with all those Nazis. So it kind of doesn't make sense. They're desperate. They gag, desperate to come to Australia, but at the same time, do nothing but rave about the racism and they're all fascist Nazis here and so on and so forth. And within that same thing, the fascist Nazi stuff, in that same thing, they perceive white Australians as being morally and spiritually inferior by quite a long way, incidentally. Morally and spiritually inferior to Indians, and the Brahmins, at the upper class Indians in particular, just cannot abide this idea that lower class people don't show them enough respect. And the Brahmins, they won't stop it. When you actually peel away, it's these people who we regard as inferior to us don't show us. In India, they show us respect, but they don't show it here. So they're outraged by even being questioned or having to fill out forms. In India, these Brahmins, they go and do whatever the fuck they want. So when they come to Australia, there are rules and regulations and filling out forms and This is an outrage. I'm a fucking Brahmin, you fucking Nazis, and so on. So now, the Indian nationalist media go into absolute hyperdrive as soon as the Australian government mentions they're even thinking about changing the laws, because as in immigration or student visa type application. And so then the Indians don't see themselves as being a corrupt basket case country, and the Brahmins are just entitled people. They don't see it that way. They see, well, we should be allowed to do what we want whenever we want. And if you limit that in some way, that means you're being racist. And if you're being racist, it means you're being white supremacist, which means you're being Hitler. They go through all that stuff. But now they do accept that Australia's got high rents and, that sort of stuff. They do accept that mass migration plays a role in that. So they've got some sort of connection with that, but they don't go and they don't appreciate it as the fact that offshore buying of property is hysterical. Offshore rich people buying hundreds of residential properties and leaving them vacant. They don't go down that path. So they think that any tightening up of regulations may affect Indians in some way. That'll be harder for Indians to come to Australia. Or harder to migrate to Australia, or more difficult to become students. Now, they don't accept that there's any corruption in all these labour hire scams. They don't accept that the Indian businesses will only employ other Indians. They don't accept, they don't talk about the real issues. They just say, well, there may be a barrier of some sort put in place so that Indians are prevented from moving freely whenever they choose to come to Australia. And on that basis, it's wrong. And anything that prevents our freedom of movement to Australia at any time we choose is morally wrong, and we must oppose it and condemn it, which they do. But they but again, the sense of entitlement for the Brahmins, the sense of entitlement for corrupt practices, sense of entitlement for coming to Australia using education and labour hire scams, all that should stay in place. Now, we're allowed to do that. And if you white people want to, and if the Australian government wants to stop it or limit it or prevent it or even cut back on it slightly, it means you're fucking racists. And that's it. What else do we need to discuss? You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.